Hello, BookTube. I'm here to do a video for Horror Mayhem. I have sort of neglected my duties as co-host. I knew from the outset that I would not be doing Horror Mayhem this year in the structure of the prompts, weekly prompts, and so much with the 250 page and under for the stories. It's an event that was created by the Bookish Bryants, who were not able to participate this year, but they allowed the inmates to take over and do this. And they are open with the idea was to read horror. Now I read two books. One I doubled up with Spring into Adventure, which I'll do a separate video on this. I have talked about it a few times on other videos, but I'll do a separate video for it. And the other one was originally started out as a buddy read as well with Branded Book Eclectic and Nathan at the Rambling Reviewer. Um, and I'm not sure if that sort of, I think, just didn't work out too well. But I did read it. It was a reread, and I read well, it's the Dr. Jekyll, the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde um, by Robert Louis Stevenson. Now, as you can see, I was able to find this edition, the second edition of the Norton Critical Edition. It's a very short. It's basically a short story or novella. Now, I'm not going to go into detail of the story. Most people, if they haven't read it, they are familiar with the idea of Dr. Jekyll transforming into Hyde through films, which take a lot of liberty at times. The short story is I'll talk more, I think, about sort of its structure, or a little bit about its structure, and why I think it's a great story, and why it may not be really horror as well. So, but yeah, it's a short piece, and it's told through a number of narrators through their eyes or through letters. And one is a friend of Dr. Jekyll as the beginning of this, and he notices differences. So he's narrating through his eyes, and then we get letters and we get testimony from other friends and other people through letters. So it's all sort of put together, but there's a lot of gaps and a lot of question marks in this, and in the introduction here, the editor of this, that's another thing that I'll be addressing is this one here. But there was one good thing that was mentioned. It says here, the tales, and I'll quote here, the tale feels incomplete, as if it isn't, as if one isn't reading a book. Bits, let me start this again, sorry. The tale feels incomplete, as if one isn't reading a book, but instead looking through a stack of papers with pages missing. Bits of writing and documents litter the story, telling fragments of the truth. And a partial accounting of these papers, a large envelope containing a will handwritten by Jekyll, a note from Jekyll instruction Utterson, who's the beginning narrator, about the order in which to read the papers, and so forth. So, and that makes it interesting, but also a bit frustrating because yeah, you do not get the full story, and that could partially be how it was written. Apparently, Stevenson had this as a bit of a dream, and he wrote it. But the first sort of manuscript was destroyed or partially destroyed. It's unclear what had happened. There's stories that he went a little too graphic of details of what Hyde no what yeah Hyde was doing while he was Hyde, um, and people have speculated this, up and down. since the beginning. But there is no original manuscript, so there's no way to know exactly what he wrote. So that's pretty clear. It just then becomes speculation. Some speculation better than others, but not all accurate. Definitely. Um, but yeah, and the thing that I had a problem with this, like I generally like the Norton Critical editions. However, newer ones have problems. Like they all probably have problems, but these ones niggle me more. And the editor here is Deborah Lutz, and she basically, because well, she sets up the whole thing of that she uses a quote that basically Robert Louis Stevenson had long hair and he was a bit of a dandy, and that used the quote to say that men would fall in love with him. And then the fact that there's no women in the story, therefore it's a homoerotic story. And I'm going, well, yeah, possibly it's a speculation, but maybe isn't it more likely that because of the way it's structured, women wouldn't have been in at that time in these areas and dealing with this so much, because it's the scientific area and clubs and that type of thing, and the men's clubs type thing. You're not going to have women in there, so and that shows more of the society of the time. That's maybe more accurate, but also not the full truth. Like it could be like a very misogynist type thing. But again, it's not the whole truth. It could be part of the truth. The other could be part of the truth too. But she doesn't mention any of that. It's the one case, and she like is setting this is how it is. And then she goes on to talk about the transformation. And she used the quote from the story that he doesn't feel like when he's hide, his body feels like it's his. It doesn't feel like it's his body anymore. So she's saying, oh, that's like transitioning, transsexual transitioning, and I'm going, what? Like that's not even thought of at the time. And it's like, yeah, okay, well, yes, that's an example of how somebody doesn't feel like they're in their own body, but there's no other evidence given. Now, wouldn't it be more likely to say, oh, well, when you have a fever, you don't feel like your body's yours, or when you're drunk? These are things that at the time that would have been understood and known. And then, but she's again trying to push. It seems like she's pushing this agenda. And then she uses, because the word is queer is used in here. So she says that, because it says that it's, he's a queer customer, or basically a queer person. There's one of the statements about Hyde. And then something about queer city. And so she's using queer in the LGBTQ sense, saying that that's what is sort of meant. And I'm going, no, it's not. I'm sorry. That definitely is not. That's not what he meant by that, because he would not have thought of that at the time. That was not around at the time. It wasn't around until the early 20th century. That kind of view of that word, or the meaning of that word, was being used. However, she brings that up, but then she puts a footnote of where it talks about a term like, somebody was gathering up faggots, and she puts that, oh, well, that means like, some kindling or some sticks, so she differentiates that of the understanding of the meaning of the of it was in the 19th century, as to it's understood now in various things of a cigarette or homosexual, or a derogatory term for homosexuality. So she distinguishes that, but she can't seem to distinguish the word queer. So I have a problem with that. It's like, there's, you can't have it you can't have it always, you just can't have it that way. In the understanding, and then going back to, like she's saying, because there's no women in here, it's homosexual, it's homoerotic, and then I'm going, okay, well, let's just use that logic for a moment. In the same way that there's no women, so therefore it's homoerotic. Okay, so if it's all women in a story and there's no men, it's homoerotic and it's lesbianism. That's the conclusion. And then, what if you got a character in a story that's a farmer, antisocial person? He's by himself on a farm. So it's not heterosexual because there's no women there. It's not homosexual because there's no men there. But there are animals. So therefore it's bestiality. Using her logic and the steps of logic, that's the conclusion. And that clearly is absurd to conclude that as a thing. But I've seen this before. Read a lot of things where people have been trying to say that anytime there's two men together or something like that as a friendship, it's homoerotic. And I'm going, well, it could be, but maybe more likely something else if there's nothing else in the story. So, like it's been interpreted so many times this. So I just had a problem with her introduction, even though she says that really good that sentence that I quoted about how the structure is. And that structure, I think, is what makes this a really good and memorable story. Because you don't have a full story. It leaves you wanting more. It's ambiguous. I come to think of Dracula, where because there's contradictions in it, and there's contradictions that the author has missed as well, but because there's contradictions, that makes it plausible for the structure of it to being done. And the structure of this is in documents. So therefore, it has to be missing stuff. If it has too much stuff, it doesn't make sense. It's not real. So therefore, the structure makes it that way. But then that leaves a lot for the brain and the reader to fill in the gaps however they want. Hence, where you can then have a billion interpretations. Now, that's the key. A billion interpretations, not one, and say that is the meaning of it, like she's doing in here. It allows so much to be read into the story at different times and at different times of the person's reading it. And I think that's why it's so great. And I do want to get the annotated edition by Klinger. I can't think of his first name at the moment, but he did the Dracula, Frankenstein. He's done Lovecraft. He's done the Sherlock Holmes and a bunch of other stuff. I almost had his first name. Klinger is the surname, but I do want to read that because he'll go into all this kind of stuff in the interpretation, and that's where you get really stuck into the story. Now, is this horror? Jekyll is a doctor. He's a scientist. I'm not sure if it actually says it is Dr. Jekyll. Sorry. He's a doctor. So he's using chemistry. He's using an elixir of chemicals to unleash this thing, for his brain, to switch. Well, see, that's the thing. That's unclear as well. But he's using a scientific method in order to make the change to hide. So therefore, it's actually more science fiction than it is horror. However, it has horror elements in it, so it's just, but it has been come down to in memory as being a horror story. So we'll leave it at that it is horror, but there's science fictional elements to it. Let's put it that way. Maybe more than the horrific elements. But this one in size or in length did fit in with the horror mayhem um, design of 250 pages or less. And if you've not read it, I would suggest to read it. It's very short, but like I say, don't go into it thinking you've got a full, deep story that explains everything. You don't. And that, as I say, I think is the joy of it. And that's the reason why, or one of the reasons, not the reason, but one of the reasons why it has lasted so long as a story, because you can see so many things in it that Robert Louis Stevenson didn't even dream of, and so people are seeing these things in it, and that's why I think it's so good. Anyway, I'll be back at another point with doing the other book that I did that was a horror. An adventure one is The Terror by Dan Simmons. Thank you, BookTube.